Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a lovely weekend. It's gotten a little bit cooler here in Nairobi, which is a pleasant relief because this is meant to be our very hot season. My piece over the weekend was Africa and the Vision Thing. I started with Jorge Luis Borges, who said, "Reality is not always probable or likely." US AFRICOM Commander General Waldhauser last week gave us a deep insight into how the US sees the African theatre, much like FOCAC affords us insights into how China looks at the continent. Interestingly, the UN Chief Secretary General Antonio Guterres harked back to another speech which was delivered to the Parliament in Cape Town on February the 3rd, 1960, and by a British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who said, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent, whether we like it or not. This growth of national consciousness is a political fact." The overarching point remains that our and Africa's reality is key, and was something that Macmillan was referring to. Returning to General Waldhauser, and I'm quoting excerpts from his speech before the Senate Committee on Armed Services. US Africa Command, with partners, strengthens security forces, counters transnational threats, conducts crisis response in order to advance US national interests, and promote security, stability, and prosperity. Each day, we have approximately 7,000 personnel conducting their assigned tasks on the African continent. According to the Fund for Peace's 2018 Fragility State Index, 33 of the 50 countries most at risk of becoming unstable are in Africa. For scale, Africa is over 3 times larger than the US. The US Africa Command Area of Responsibility encompasses 53 countries with a population of 1.3 billion. By 2050, this figure is forecasted to almost double to over 2.54 billion, with 1 out of every 4 people on the planet living on the African continent. Wayne Gretzky said a good hockey player plays where the puck is. A great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be. The demographic puck is headed to Africa. Whether it will be a fabulous dividend or a time bomb is still an open question, of course. Waldhauser added, US Africa Command also plays a significant role in advancing the priorities outlined in the national security and defense strategies, which emphasize the rise of China and Russia as key competitors. US Africa Command has also observed increased engagement of non-traditional security actors such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the UAE as both challenges and opportunities to our mission. Curiously, India did not get a shout out, and nor did Europe, where France and Italy are at loggerheads. The US has a hard power advantage with which it can tilt the pitch. But that advantage, whilst important, is one-dimensional. The speech spoke of a switch away from terrorism, notwithstanding a nod towards violent extremist organizations known as VEOs, and their destabilizing impacts on African partner states and towards great power competition. Our efforts to ensure strategic access must also be viewed through the lens of competitor influence and coercive activities. China is a strategic competitor and has most successfully employed its model in Djibouti, holding 80% of the government of Djibouti's debt, where access through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Red Sea, and the Suez Canal remains a US strategic imperative. The US is evidently concerned that China will eventually seek to deny US access to African markets and ports. The report also cited Senegal and Angola as being recipients of Chinese largesse, Waldhäuser mentions Russia, which seems to be also making its move. Today, as we scan our continent, there are plenty of fluid situations, from Bashir's Khartoum to Mnangagwa, Zimbabwe, and many points in between. Young people are connected to each other and to the world. So far, it is Prime Minister Abiy who appears to be sketching out a new African political horizon. And this brings me to the vision thing. Where is it? Who is providing it? It's high time we authored it, because this is a born-free generation. I was referencing Antonio Gutierrez's comments about the wind of change. This is the link to his tweet. And then the actual speech on February the 3rd, 1960, Harold Macmillan. The wind of change is blowing through this continent. Whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. Andrew Koribiko has given a very interesting interpretation on the Russian arrival in Africa. And he's saying making the People's Republic dependent on Russia's regime reinforcement services could in effect crown Moscow as kingmaker of African geopolitics in the future. Opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema claimed that President Edgar Lungu tried to assassinate him. It's not clear whether it was an unruly crowd or police excesses, but he says police fired live ammunition at the meeting, which he was addressing on Friday, to try to kill him. South African all shares up 0.96% this year. The rand, as I spoke about before, kicked off 2019 on a high and was the best performing currency against the dollar, netting a return of around 7% in the first month of the year. This is a chart, a one-year chart. You can see that big rally, and now we're backing up again. Egyptian pound, 17.6160, really has outperformed. A Nigerian election pits an ex-general against a tycoon, says The Economist. And then describing the Ajaokuta steel company near Lokoja in central Nigeria, apparently $8 billion spent in public money without producing a beam. During Buhari's term, unemployment has risen from 8.2 to 23.1%. Abu Bakr's slogan is "Let's get Nigerians working again," and saying that it's a very, very close run election. This is February the 16th. Nigerians will go to the polls. 84 million people are registered to vote in the country's 6th general election since military rule ended in 1999. We are tired of these same old leaders, he says. We're laying the foundation for a revolution in 2023. Until then, Nigeria will be stuck with mediocrity. The Nigerian all shares positive 0.32% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.32% this year. RioZim has halted output as the central bank fails to make payments. Central bank reneged on a commitment made in November to allow all gold producers to keep 55% of their export earnings in so-called Nostro accounts. And I agree with Mr. William Chewy. If the RBZ can't remit 55% to someone who's bringing in Forex, what are the possibilities that they can sustain giving dollars to fuel Delta or other seemingly important imports that aren't bringing in Forex? 21st of January, I said the mind game that ZANU-PF had played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke. And then there was a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. And I was quoting Sam Farai Monroe, who told The Guardian the government can switch off the internet, but it cannot, but not the frustrations of millions of people. With respect to RioZim, I agree that deception can only run for so long. Eventually the legs go. RioZim, soon it will be Delta. And then Wamagaisa says the trouble is his fellow African leaders will be patting him on the back, expressing empty solidarity. 8th of October last year, I spoke about that one domino that has suddenly tipped over Zimbabwe. I spoke of the government's voodoo economics, where they pump prime the economy in order to win the election. And look at this, the country's forex cover ratio averaged 3.2% between January and November 2018. That means for every $100 in circulation, the country has an average of $3.20 in foreign currency. And that's why I called it voodoo economics. ZANU-PF briefing papers blamed the opposition parties and rogue NGOs for an orgy of violence, accusing them of following a plan by hostile elements to subvert the state by rendering the country ungovernable. And as I said on the 21st of January, what is clear to me is that Zimbabwe is at a tipping point moment. Mnangagwa treats the opposition like cockroaches, says Tendai Biti. Everything that is happening has the ugly fingerprints of Emerson Mnangagwa. We are cockroaches that must be crushed. Listen to this, Mugabe was a restraining force to these bulldogs, and the chief of these bulldogs is Emerson Mnangagwa. Cockroaches have a very poor linguistic history. Rwanda's single B credit rating is affirmed by S&P Global. Outlook still positive as strong growth prospects are rising, plus more diversified exports. Jumia is planning an initial public offering in New York this year that could value the business at $1.5 billion. A US IPO would catapult Jumia into the global spotlight after 7 years of rapid growth across Africa, where it provides Amazon-like service and has platforms in 13 countries. It's a rare so-called unicorn in Africa, the private company valued at more than $1 billion, being one of only 3 according to research firm CB Insights. Company was set up by French entrepreneurs Sacha Poignonec and Jeremy Hodara in 2012 to take advantage of rising internet use in the world's least connected continent. The East African's front page, shadowy shell company unveiling Indo-Power mystery firm that bought $180 million of Tanzania's cashew nuts. Old Donyo Lengai means mountain of God in the Maasai language and is still an active volcano. That photograph is from Syrian camp. Ethiopia is looking at selling stakes in Ethio Telecom, Ethiopian Airlines, Ethiopian Power, and the Maritime Transport and Logistics Corporation. But obviously they're going to continue to keep a majority, particularly in the telco and the banking sector. Telkom and Airtel have signed a binding agreement to operate under a joint venture company to be named Airtel Telkom. I wrote about this on the 28th of January when I said there's been a flurry of activity. India's Bharti Airtel is in talks to buy Telkom Kenya. Bharti Airtel is keen to fatten up its Africa business ahead of an IPO. I also mentioned that banking is seeing some consolidation with the planned merger between CBA and NIC, buyout of Jamii Bora, and that private equity had taken a big bite of Mr. Kantaria's Prime Bank. The Kenya shilling has appreciated last week by 0.5% against the dollar to close at a 9-month high of 100.1, and it's up 1.7% year to date. I wrote earlier this year about how a move below 100 would catch a lot of people off guard. We seem to be headed there. Yields on the 91, 182-day and 364 T-bills declined to 7%, 8.6%, and 9.6%. The average interbank rate declined to 3% from 4.6% the previous week. 10-year Eurobonds remained unchanged at 7.6%, and the 30-year at 8.5%. That was in double digits at the end of last year. Private sector credit growth remains a key concern, recording anemic growth since the implementation of the interest rate cap, coming in at 2.4% in the 12 months to December 2018. Nairobi All Share has had probably its best start to the year ever. It's up 14.25% so far this year. That's why I wrote a piece on the 28th of January, Reasons for Optimism. NSE 20 is up 7.98% year to date. Safaricom customers have borrowed 6.2 billion shillings in 1 month on the Fuliza overdraft service, revealing a huge pent-up demand for instant micro-loans in the economy. Safaricom crossed £1 trillion market cap earlier this year, and the share price data is on Rich Wrap-Up. So if you want to have a look, EABL has stormed over 20% higher this year. That's after releasing very good half-year results, about which I interviewed its CEO, Andrew Cowan. Have a listen. From the air, the Mara River looks stunning in the early morning. This is the Great Mara River, taken by Silvia Rodriguez Gonzalez. From the air, the Mara River looks stunning in the early morning. The animals begin to wake up and move among the flora, and the perspective of the meanders of the river is truly precious. KenGen has a market capitalization of $427.74 million. Take a look at the interview I did with Rebecca Miano after the previous set of earnings. Last week, banks lifted the stock index. NIC was up 10.1%, Barclays 7%, KCB 6.6%, Standard Chartered 5.9%. The NSE is trading at a P ratio of 10.7 and a dividend yield of 4.5. And thank you for coming by.